Yo, what's up, Visions fans? Ready Player Will here. Back today. We're doing the Guild War tier rankings. Finally, I know it's been a couple months and I've gotten a ton of requests to do this. So let's just jump into it. I've been excited to do this. I'm essentially going to go over the map at a very high level quickly, just so you can see how it affects some of the rankings at the moment. And then obviously, I'll go through the rankings individually. With that being said, let's jump into the map. So Castle Exterior 2 is just a bit above average in terms of distance across horizontally, which is really important because it essentially dictates how quickly the team fight occurs. Whether you're baited out on your first turn, if someone's faster than you, if you get an extra turn to get an extra buff in or not. And so right now it's 11 spaces across, which is a little bit smaller than the previous map we had, but basically means that most people can't be immediately baited out entirely across the map. There are some cases where that's true, but not in the majority of instances. You're also looking at what are some natural funnels on the map where people are going to move toward. Not all maps have this, where if you have a wide open arena, essentially the aggro starting hate will dictate where people move. But there are some maps where the height variations and limitations dictate where people have to go. This map does kind of have one of them where not only are there two obstructions right here in the forms of the columns, but right in the middle, there is a height of 2 here where if you're at a base jump of 1, you're not going to be able to go straight across. So essentially what happens is you're forced to either go this way or this way. So it's not technically a true funnel, because even if you are going one way or the other, typically you will still get caught up in the AoE of both. So it doesn't really matter whether you go right or left. But theoretically, there is some pathing decisions to be made based upon how they move there that could adversely affect what you were trying to do. The third thing to talk about is the obstructions here with those pillars. Really important because it prevents the people that are across from each other here from essentially moving straight ahead and potentially baiting out an enemy attack. Instead, you're going to be moving this way around the column to start one direction or the other, most often toward the middle. But I have seen some cases where you go to the outside, surprisingly enough. And there's a weird bug at the moment where slot 2 and slot 3 on defense are flipped from what you see on your formation screen. So just be wary of that. Obviously, it's no surprise most of you have probably seen it at this point. But the last thing to talk about, there are some decent height variations in the middle. Nothing too crazy in terms of drop-offs, because everything is within a height of 2 for the most part. And a lot of the stronger abilities in this game are a height of 2 or less, so they're not really hindered by the middle of the map, but there are some characters that are adversely affected by this. So that's the map overview in a nutshell. Next, I'm going to talk about how these rankings are determined. So number 1, it's specifically aimed at the current Guild War. Not even Arena, because obviously a completely different map, so a completely different set of strengths and weaknesses for characters, but Guild War. And then what is prevalently used in the top 25 of guilds. I do look even further down than that just to make sure if there's any oddities here or there, but I do have a special emphasis on the top 10 as well, where at that level you really are min-maxing the strengths and weaknesses of the characters, and the things that are typically true in the top 25 in terms of comp synergy and character strength will also be true as you go further down the ladder. Obviously, the inverse of that statement is not true. So that's kind of the parameters of this. I do look and scout what guilds are currently using as the basis for this. And so my rankings aren't really like who I think are best or who I think has some upside, but really what's being used in the community by and large. I do have a rating bias toward what's being used on defense, mostly in the form of macros. The idea being that on defense, you don't get to pick your opponent, so you really have to put out like the strongest overall comp that can potentially deal with the most. So those characters that are really strong on defense at the moment kind of get a little extra bump in the ratings, whereas characters that are on offense can obviously gear them toward targeting certain kinds of comps. So although you might get some success with them, and they are strong, they're probably not as strong compared to their macro counterparts. I do have some judgment calls in the lower grades, just obviously who has some upside, who doesn't. But then finally the question, why now? There is actually a ton of balance in the game at the moment. And not only because of Jaden's release, where even in JP, he did enough to really like kind of mitigate some of what made Black Rosalina strong, but Elena's release and her vision card has really jacked up the light cast, where not only are they viable with the dark cast, even relatively strong per se, because this map is a little bit further in distance, but it also has some trickle down effects in the other elements as well, where now that they've kind of cut out the oppression of the dark meta, other casts can really rise up and their strengths can really be utilized. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's made it extremely difficult to gauge, but I think things are in a relatively good spot overall. So let's finally jump into it. Starting with the S tier of things, Jaden, Elena, Engelbert, Charlotte, Elena, or Black Rosalina, and Stern. So Jaden and Starlight Elena are really great for this map because they have a lot of awesome buffs to start the fight, and you can get really creative with how they move in terms of toward a teammate or straight ahead. Statistically, they're very strong, an incredible amount of chaining potential. So the two of them really kind of setting the meta at the moment. Engelbert kind of gets the edge at the moment in terms of the tank alongside with them because he's just so bulky, and he does have plenty of opportunities to get his courage off. Sentinel is obviously really strong for him. Saintly Wall, depending upon what you're seeing for physical abilities coming in. And overall, just he can get obliterated by magic if not properly geared for, but because Jaden and Elena technically do missile and slash damage, he's not getting blown off the face of the earth by them, even if his spirit value is a little bit on the lower side of things. Talking about spirit, though, part of what makes Charlotte so strong is that she can gear really high for the spirit and has some great innate slash resistance and whatnot. Obviously, Jaden and Starlight Elena have some spirit penetration and slash resistance penetration, missile penetration, so Charlotte doesn't get the full utility of her defensive kit, but as far as tanks go, she's still very, very strong and does enable the lightning cast to still thrive potentially. Black Rose Elena, still a monster because she is so fast. You can really fine-tune her AI, devastating abilities in conjunction with the other characters. Most of her abilities are height 2 or less, so she's not hindered by the height. And then Knight of Ruin Stern, the same kind of concept. Put him right in the middle of the map. He comes out with Hazard Breaker, huge AoE, height 2 or less, so you can really get a wide AoE of people in there. And defense break of 30 is super strong at the moment, particularly because most characters aren't building up their defense, they're building up their spirit for Elena and Jaden. So not only are people on the lower side of defense stats at the moment, but Stern will further bring that stat down and really dish out some extra damage because of it. Now this S tier characters really enables the next tier of A characters. So Warrior of Light, still really great, just a different kind of tank than Engelbert, where he's not necessarily as beefy to some degree, but he's got the shield that does not only physical but also magical. He's got a self-healing ability. He's got stopped for a status effect. His limit break is a great chaining potential, where if he starts the limit break, he gives himself protect and shell, and then starts off something for Elena or Jaden to continue off of, which beefs up their damage. Yuna, another great character as well, where even though Elena and Jaden are pretty squishy, between Elena's courage, Yuna's re-raise, her full life, even if one of them ends up dying, Yuna can sustain them really, really well. And obviously, she's also pretty potent magic-wise, where she gets a ton of benefit from the vision cards that they use. Dwayne and Venera is still really strong as well. Dwayne is a little bit of a step below here because the map is so long that since he can't generate hate and he can't insta-kill as quickly and is a little more at the mercy of how the enemies turtle up before they engage, he doesn't have as much influence in the battle as he normally does. Kind of the same concept with Venera, where Maidens of the Rose was such a great vision card for so long, but now with these new vision cards for the light cast, essentially it's kind of equaled out what made her so strong. So she's still really good, just not necessarily to the same degree that she used to be, particularly because she is also slash and missile damage types, which are actively being hedged against for resistances. So she's not as offensively potent as she may have used to have been. Then finally, Cloud and Frederica are still good. They still have a lot of guaranteed hits, so they do great with the evasion. This map in particular, though, just a little bit smaller than you might normally like to see them. Regardless, at the end of the day, Charlotte does still do a really good job enabling them. It's just that there was a prevalent amount of Earth that can be used, and the Earth cast does a half-decent job at countering them as well. So we're going to segue into that here on the B level of things, and there's a definite head-scratcher here. I know it. All of you are looking at Lara Croft, Aerith, and somewhere else being like, water? But there's lightning units in S and A. How in the hell are they good here? This is really primarily on attack, and it's something that's being utilized by Visipor, #1 guild in all global. They have 5 people currently, as of yesterday, on attack using this mono water comp, and part of the reason is, A, they do really well against the light cast. Aerith has an AoE magic barrier that does a really great job of sustaining them. Lara Croft obviously has a ton of guaranteed hit, and her evasion is competitive with Elena's. And then somewhere else, has some physical beefiness to her, some good AoE, and some healing power down if people are using Yuna. So there is something to be exploited there. Again, not necessarily strong on defense by any stretch of the imagination, but there is a synergy there that plays into the current meta. Ketone and Zazan still also relatively strong. Zazan will pretty much always be good because he's got so much going for him for survivability, overall stats. But Ketone a little less so on this map. As you saw in the middle, not everything is as flat as she would like it to be because Drain Force is a height 0 ability. So it's a lot harder for her to consistently get that Drain Force attack off. Because of that, you're kind of hit and miss with how she gets used. But if lightning is prevalent, they're still going to have a place in time, and Zazanda's pretty good against missile attacks, so not a real big threat from Frederica and Cloud on that front. When we're looking at the sea level characters, Tifa 2B, again, kind of the same concept as the water trio, where they are primarily used on attack. They do really well overall because they are competitive enough accuracy wise to be in the evasion meta. They're super beefy on their own, that they have courage and physical barriers that they can't necessarily get as chunked down as quickly as some of the other typical evasion units, but little hit or miss to how they get used. Summer Kilf and Fina also getting used with this new light meta, where Summer Kilf has enough tankiness in herself that she can also really synergize with Elena and Jaden, and then Fina also a really good sustaining character where she's got the full life. She has some missile attacks that really feed in with Jaden's vision cards, so I've seen a ton of upside with her as well. Not obviously to Yuna's degree, but she's definitely stronger than most MR units would ever be at the top end of the game. Then finally, King Mont, really still one of the more well-rounded tanks in the game, just because his kit does so much in the form of utility. It's just that the fire cast overall isn't as strong in the current evasion meta, so that his actual benefit and how you can stack fire vision cards isn't as pronounced as it used to be. So he's still good and probably really good in the vast majority of a lot of the guilds as you go further down the list, but in the broad scheme of the games, kind of a little bit on the weaker side of things at the moment. Finally, our D cast here, where Luel and Miraga still have a place for using that Earth cast to counter the lightning, but we are see landing a little bit on the decline at the moment. So Luel and Miraga kind of following that trend. Same with Summer Lilith, where she had some upside on the last map because of the range, but not as much here. It still exists, but not perfect. Rain, still serviceable because he is still a really great magic tank, so he does well against Jaden and Elena from a spear perspective. His vision card gives him slash resistance, obviously some synergy with King Mont. It's just that his overall mobility and his speed and his accuracy isn't all that great, so there are some ways to exploit him. And then finally, the Ice Cast, they are hyper accurate in terms of what they can equip for vision cards. Sweetheart Salir has some guaranteed hits. Gilgamesh obviously is really great for quicken strats and for keen blade strats, so there is still something to be said for an ice strength that's playing into things, particularly because fire isn't as around as it used to be. It's just a really matter of getting Freyeve to a place where she can spell veil blade enough that she can get her spirit up and really get her stats in a place that she can be competitive as a tank compared to someone like Charlotte or Warrior Light or Engelbert. So that's kind of the gist of things. It's a pretty even distribution here. Even element wise, there's not a ton that's missing. And so it really is a chess game at the moment of trying to match up against certain comps and seeing what gets rotated in and out on a daily basis. So there's still a lot learning more about this map as the AI gets more fine-tuned, but this is kind of where things sit at the moment, and I would imagine this is going to kind of stay like this for just a little while. So thanks for watching. Can't wait to hear what you guys think in the comments, and I'll talk to you all soon.